The wind howled like a vengeful spirit tearing through Rachel Vanderbilt's hair. She clung to the cold wet railing of the 18th floor penthouse terrace. Below her the neon lights of Wall Street blurred into a chaotic streak. A mocking reminder of the empire she'd thought she built with her own hands. Hours earlier she'd realized it had all been a facade. Ethan Blackwell's face, once the object of her every devotion, was cold and unrecognizable. His eyes void of any remorse as he pressed his palm harder against her back. It wasn't just the betrayal of his affair that had shattered her. It was the folder of documents she'd found that afternoon hidden in his locked safe. Pages of falsified ledgers, offshore accounts, and manipulated stock records, all pointing to one truth. Ethan was never just a greedy lover, he was a manipulator, using her family's fortune and connections to orchestrate a massive capital scam. The empire they'd built was a house of cards. She, with her sharp mind and unwavering trust, had been his most valuable pawn. When she'd confronted him, he'd dropped the charade instantly. She wasn't just a spurned lover being betrayed, she was a loose end being cleared. Why, Ethan? Her voice cracked, blood pooling in her mouth from the blow he'd struck. Her hand instinctively fell to her still flat abdomen where their unborn child, only 6 weeks old. A secret she'd been waiting to share was fading with every passing second. I gave you everything, my family's fortune, my connections, my mind. I even turned my back on my own parents to stand by you. How could you? Ethan chuckled, a low, cruel sound that cut through the wind. Beside him, a woman in a red silk dress clung to his arm. Her red lipstick smudged her eyes, glinting with triumph. It was Clara Bennett, his personal assistant, the woman he'd been cheating on her with for over a year. The woman who'd helped him cover up his fraudulent accounts, the woman he'd chosen over her, over their child, over everything. Everything? Ethan scoffed, leaning in so his breath brushed her ear, icy and venomous. You gave me nothing I couldn't have taken for myself. Your family's money was a shortcut, your connections a convenience, your brilliance a tool to cover my tracks. But you were a liability. You started asking questions, digging into the accounts, noticing the inconsistencies. You were going to ruin everything. Clara gets me. She doesn't nag me about transparency or morality. She just lets me be the man I'm meant to be, the most powerful manipulator on Wall Street. Clara giggled, running a manicured finger down Ethan's chest. Poor Rachel, she really thought you loved her, didn't she? You were just using her, baby. Everyone knew it except her. And when she finally figured out your little game, well, loose ends don't get to live. Rachel felt her world crumble around her. The years of sacrifice, the late nights poring over financial reports he doctored to keep her in the dark, the arguments with her parents, the way she'd ignored every red flag, all for a man who'd never loved her, who'd only used her as a shield for his crimes, all for a child who would never see the light of day. Rage and grief surged through her hotter than the fire of 1,000 suns, but her strength was fading, her grip on the railing slipping. You'll pay for this, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I swear to God, Ethan Blackwell, you'll pay for killing us, for using me, for being the monster you are. Ethan's smile widened, cold and cruel. Pay? I'm the king of Wall Street, I own this city. Who's going to make me pay? You're about to be a splatter on the sidewalk, a forgotten footnote in my success story. With one final brutal push he sent her over the edge. The world spun wildly as she plummeted toward the ground, the wind screaming in her ears. She saw Ethan and Clara leaning over the railing, their faces blurred, their laughter echoing down to her. She felt the pain of her unborn child slipping away, the betrayal cutting deeper than any fall. In her last moment she closed her eyes and prayed for a second chance. A chance to make him suffer, a chance to never again be the naive, trust-blind fool. A chance to uncover his manipulation game and take back what was hers. I'll come back, she whispered as darkness swallowed her. And I'll destroy you. The sound of a coffee machine gurgling jolted Rachel awake. She blinked, disoriented, her head throbbing as if she'd been hit by a truck. The first thing she noticed was the soft glow of morning light filtering through the window. Not the harsh neon of Wall Street, but the warm golden light of a small apartment in Manhattan's West Village. The second thing she noticed was her hand, young, unscarred, free of the diamond ring Ethan had given her. A token of his love, he'd said, but she now knew it was just another chain. She sat up, her heart racing, and looked around. The apartment was tiny, cluttered with textbooks and coffee mugs. A poster of the New York Stock Exchange taped to the wall. It was her apartment from when she was 22, a senior at Columbia Business School. Before she'd met Ethan, before she'd given up her dreams, before she'd become his pawn. A calendar on the desk caught her eye, June 15, 20XX. The day she'd first met Ethan Blackwell at a campus networking event. The day her life had taken its first wrong turn. This time she vowed things would be different. She would avoid Ethan at all costs. No networking event, no conversation, no chance for him to sink his claws into her again. She would finish business school, build her own career, and stay far away from his capital games. But fate had other plans. That afternoon, as she was studying in the library, her phone rang. Her father's assistant calling to tell her that her family's investment firm had received a proposal proposal from a young entrepreneur named Ethan Blackwell seeking funding for a startup. The proposal was polished, the numbers seemed flawless, and it was clear he'd done his research. He knew exactly how to appeal to her family's interests. Even worse, her father had already agreed to a meeting, and he wanted Rachel to be there, to use her sharp eye for detail. Rachel's blood ran cold. She'd tried to run to avoid him, but he was already woven into the fabric of her life, into her family's legacy, into the world of finance she couldn't escape. She realized in that moment that fate wasn't a single line she could diverge from. It was a net tight and inescapable, and Ethan was just one thread in it. No matter how hard she tried to avoid him, she would still be drawn into the same capital web. The same web of greed and manipulation, because her family's wealth, her talent, her name all made her a target. She couldn't just walk away, she had to fight. Rachel didn't go to the meeting with Ethan, but she couldn't ignore the weight of the capital scheme closing in around her. She needed to build her own power, her own safety net, something Ethan couldn't touch. And she had a secret weapon, her memories of the future. In her past life, she'd watched Ethan and other tycoons make fortunes off specific stocks, specific tech companies, specific market shifts. She knew which investments would soar, which would crash. She thought for a moment that this was her advantage. That rebirth was a shortcut to success, a way to outrun the net. She acted quickly, using the small savings she'd accumulated from internships. She invested heavily in a small tech company that in her past life had exploded in value within 6 months. She counted the days, confident that her memory would lead her to an easy win. She would make enough money to distance herself from her family's firm, to build her own empire, to never have to rely on anyone again. But the market didn't follow the script. 2 weeks later, the tech company announced a delay in its flagship product, and its stock plummeted. Rachel watched in horror as her savings evaporated, not all of it, but enough to sting. It was a small failure, but it hit her hard. She'd trusted her memory implicitly, thought it was a guarantee. But it wasn't. The numbers didn't lie. Her sure thing had turned into a loss. She sat on her couch staring at her laptop screen, the weight of the realization sinking in. Her hands trembled as she whispered the words that would become her new mantra. Her hook, a reminder that rebirth wasn't a gift, but a second chance to learn. The future is not completely reliable. The small failure lingered in Rachel's mind, gnawing at her confidence. She replayed her past life in her head, the years she'd spent by Ethan's side, the successes they'd celebrated, the deals she'd helped close. She'd always prided herself on her intelligence, her ability to read the market, her sharp instincts. She'd thought those successes were hers, that she was the driving force behind their empire. But now, as she sat surrounded by crumpled stock reports and failed investment notes, she began to question everything. What if her instincts weren't hers at all? What if Ethan had carefully guided her, fed her information, manipulated her decisions to fit his own manipulation plan? What if her success wasn't a testament to her ability, but a tool he'd used to keep her compliant, to make her feel valuable while he used her family's resources to line his own pockets? She thought back to the late nights she'd spent poring over financial reports, the times she'd suggested a strategy only to have Ethan approve it with a smile, the way he'd always praised her intelligence but never let her see the full picture. She thought about the falsified ledgers she'd found in his safe, the ones that had been hidden in plain sight but that she'd never noticed until it was too late. Had he been grooming her all along, using her brilliance to cover his tracks, to make his scam look legitimate? It was a terrifying thought, a cognitive collapse that hit her like a truck. For the first time, she realized her past success wasn't hers. She hadn't been a partner to Ethan. She'd been a pawn, a well-educated, trusting pawn who unknowingly helped him build his fraudulent empire. And that realization was more painful than any betrayal, any failure, any fall. Desperate to clear her head, Rachel left her apartment and wandered the streets of Manhattan. She needed to get away from the numbers, from the memories, from the weight of her own naivety. She found herself on 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, a busy intersection where the glitz of Wall Street met the chaos of the city. And that's when she saw him. He was sitting on the corner, leaning against a building, a crumpled copy of the Wall Street Journal in his hands. He was dirty, his clothes torn and ragged, his hair unkempt. But his eyes were sharp, piercing, filled with a cold intelligence that made Rachel's skin prickle. It was Liam Cross, the man she'd remembered from her past life. The man she'd once thought was her destined one, the one who would help her build her empire. But this time there was no warmth, no sense of destiny. As she watched him, he looked up directly at her and his eyes narrowed. He didn't see a well-dressed young woman. He saw something else. Something in her posture, in her gaze, in the way she kept glancing at the stock ticker on a nearby screen, gave her away. In that split second, Rachel knew he'd seen through her. He knew she was gambling on something she shouldn't, on the future. He was a dangerous man, not because he was violent, but because he was perceptive. Because he could see the truth she was trying to hide. She quickly looked away, her heart racing. She'd come here to escape, to clear her head, but she'd stumbled upon someone who could unravel everything. Liam Cross wasn't her savior, he was a threat. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Liam, his sharp eyes, his ability to see through her facade. If anyone could help her navigate the capital web, if anyone could understand the danger she was in, it was him. She knew he was smart, knew he had a knack for numbers. So the next day she went back to the same corner, determined to convince him to work with her. She approached him, her voice steady, her posture confident. "I know you're smart," she said, cutting to the chase. "I know you understand the market. And I know something you don't. I know what's going to happen next. I can tell you which stocks will rise, which will fall. We can make a fortune together, just trust me." Liam looked up at her, his expression cold, unimpressed. He closed the Wall Street Journal, slowly folding it neatly before setting it aside. Then he leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers, and spoke, his voice rough but sharp. "You're not an investment, you're cheating." Rachel froze. She'd expected skepticism, doubt, even mockery, but not this. This direct, unflinching accusation. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to hide her shock. "You're not analyzing the market," Liam said, his tone flat. "You're not looking at the numbers, the trends, the risks. You're betting on something you can't possibly know, something that hasn't happened yet. That's not investment, that's cheating. And cheating always catches up to you. You think you're clever, but you're just a kid playing with fire." He stood up, towering over her, his gaze unyielding. "Save your money, save your lies. I don't work with cheaters." With that he turned and walked away, leaving Rachel standing on the corner, humiliated and defeated. She'd tried to convince him to use her advantage to win him over, but he'd seen right through her. She'd lost badly. And for the first time she realized that her past memories were more of a curse than a gift. Liam's words lingered in Rachel's mind for days. "You're not an investment, you're cheating." He was right. She'd been approaching this all wrong, trying to convince him with her secret, trying to use the future as a crutch. That's why she'd failed. Liam didn't want a partner who cheated. He wanted a partner who could play the game fairly, intelligently, with skill. So she abandoned her old strategy. No more trying to persuade him with visions of the future. No more begging for his trust. From now on it would be a transaction, cold, clear, mutually beneficial. She had something he needed, access to capital, her family's resources, which she could now leverage without Ethan's influence. And a deep understanding of the market's inner workings gained from her past life, not just her memories. He had something she needed, his brilliant mind, his ability to read trends, his lack of ties to Ethan's circle. It wasn't trust, it wasn't friendship, it was a deal. She spent the next few days refining her offer, making sure it was impossible for him to refuse. She would provide the capital, the connections, and the market insights framed as her own analysis, not future knowledge. He would provide the strategy, the execution, the sharp eye that could catch the flaws in any plan. They would split the profits 50-50. No strings attached, no lies, just a transaction. Before approaching Liam again, Rachel did her homework. She needed to know who she was dealing with, what made him tick, what his weaknesses were, what he was running from. What she found shocked her and in a strange way comforted her. Liam Cross wasn't just a homeless man with a knack for numbers. He was a former quant genius, one of the youngest analysts ever hired by a top Wall Street firm. His downfall had been simple. He'd uncovered a massive insider trading scheme at his firm. A scheme orchestrated by the company's CEO, who just so happened to be a close associate of Ethan Blackwell. When Liam tried to expose the scam, the CEO turned on him, falsifying evidence to make it look like Liam was guilty of insider trading. He was fired, blacklisted from every firm on Wall Street, his reputation destroyed. He'd lost everything, his job, his savings, his home. He'd been living on the streets ever since, hiding from the capital world that had betrayed him. Rachel felt a surge of recognition. Liam had been played by the same kind of men as her, powerful, greedy manipulators who used others to cover their crimes. He'd been a pawn just like she had. That was their common point. They'd both been betrayed by the world of finance, both left with nothing. And that meant they both had a reason to fight back. To take back what was theirs, to beat the manipulators at their own game. Armed with this knowledge, Rachel went back to the corner where Liam usually sat. This time she didn't come with promises of future fortunes. She came with a test. She approached him, sat down beside him, and pulled out a folder of stock reports, all falsified, with subtle errors that only someone with Liam's expertise would catch. She handed him the folder. "I'm considering investing in these," she said, her tone casual, as if she didn't know the reports were fake. "What do you think, good move or waste of money?" Liam raised an eyebrow, but took the folder. He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the numbers, his fingers tapping lightly on the paper. Rachel watched him, holding her breath. This was the test. Could he see through the lies? Could he prove that he was worth her investment? After a few minutes, Liam closed the folder and tossed it back to her. "These are garbage," he said, his tone flat. "Falsified revenue numbers, inflated growth projections, a cash flow statement that doesn't add up. Whoever put this together thinks they're clever, but they missed 3 key errors. If you invest in this, you'll lose every penny." Rachel smiled. He'd passed. He'd seen through the fake reports just as he'd seen through her earlier lies. "You're right," she said, honesty in her voice for for the first time. They're fake. I wanted to see if you were as good as I thought you were. Liam's expression softened slightly, but he still looked wary. Why test me? Because I have a proposition, Rachel said, leaning forward. A transaction, no lies, no cheating. Just two people who've been screwed over by the same system working together to get what we deserve. Liam was skeptical, but Rachel's offer was too good to refuse. Access to capital, connections, a chance to fight back against the men who'd destroyed his life. It wasn't trust, it was pure unadulterated self-interest. A benefit binding. He would bring his analytical genius, his ability to spot scams and manipulate the market. She would bring the money, the connections, and the inside knowledge of Ethan's circle. Together they would make money, together they would survive. They agreed on the terms. Rachel would put up $50,000 of her own savings. Money she'd earned from internships, not her family's fortune. She wanted to keep that separate for now. Liam would develop a low-risk investment strategy focusing on undervalued stocks with strong growth potential. They would make decisions together, but Liam would have final say on the strategy. No more of Rachel's future interference. Profits would be split evenly. If either of them betrayed the other, the deal was off and the guilty party would walk away with nothing. It was cold, it was clinical, it was exactly what they both needed. There was no warmth, no friendship, no hint of anything beyond mutual benefit. But as they sat on that corner going over the numbers, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. This was how she would survive. This was how she would beat Ethan. Not with lies, not with shortcuts, but with skill. And a partner who was just as hungry, just as damaged as she was. Liam's strategy was conservative, deliberate, nothing like the high-risk, high-reward bets Rachel had tried to make with her memories. He focused on small, undervalued tech stocks and municipal bond stocks that were stable, predictable, and unlikely to crash. Rachel hated it at first. She wanted to rush to make big money fast to get her revenge sooner. But she trusted the deal, trusted Liam's expertise, and held back. A month later they checked their accounts. They'd made a profit, $12,000. It wasn't huge profit, it wasn't the kind of windfall Rachel had dreamed of with her future memories. But it was a reasonable profit, a steady, sustainable gain. And it was earned through hard work, analysis, and skill, not through cheating. Rachel stared at the numbers, a small smile spreading across her face. This was real, this was something she could build on. No shortcuts, no lies, no relying on the future. Just pure, honest success. Liam sat beside her, his expression neutral, but Rachel could see a flicker of pride in his eyes. Told you, he said, his tone gruff. Slow and steady wins the race. She nodded. He was right. For the first time since her rebirth, she felt like she was in control. Not of the future, but of her own choices. And that was more powerful than any memory. The small success gave Rachel confidence, maybe too much confidence. She started pushing for bigger investments, for higher risks. She'd seen the potential of certain stocks in her past life. And even though she wasn't using her memories directly, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing out on bigger profits. She wanted to add leverage, to borrow money, to invest more, to speed up their growth. Liam refused flat out. No, he said, slamming his laptop shut during one of their meetings. Leverage is a trap. We have steady profits, we're building capital, we're doing this right. Adding leverage would put everything we've built at risk. If the market dips, we lose it all. And I'm not going back to the streets because you're greedy. Rachel felt her temper rise. I'm not being greedy, she snapped. I'm being smart. We have the opportunity to make real money, to build real power. Why are you so scared to take a risk? I'm not scared, Liam shot back. I'm realistic. You want to rush, you want to skip the work, you want to get to the end faster. But there are no shortcuts, not anymore. If you can't handle that, then maybe this deal is over. The room went silent. Rachel stared at him, her jaw tight, her hands clenched. She was angry at his stubbornness, angry at his refusal to see her point, angry at the fact that he was right. Liam stared back, unyielding. It was their first real disagreement, their first clash of wills. And it was a sign of things to come. The transaction was starting to crack, and beneath it something else was simmering. Frustration, tension, a hint of something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. The disagreement lingered, casting a shadow over their partnership. Rachel couldn't let go of the idea of bigger profits, of faster success. She couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's empire, of the power he'd wielded. She wanted that power badly. And she knew of a memory node, a specific date, a specific stock that in her past life had skyrocketed after a surprise announcement. It was a high-risk bet, but the reward was enormous. If it worked, they would double their capital overnight. If it failed, they would lose everything. Liam warned her, begged her even. Don't do this, he said, his voice urgent. We don't have enough information. We don't know if the announcement will even happen this time. You're gambling, Rachel, gambling with everything we've built. But Rachel wasn't listening. She was fixated on the memory, on the potential reward, on the chance to outrun the past and the net of fate. She made the bet without Liam's approval. She took their entire savings plus a small loan leverage, despite Liam's warnings, and invested it all in the stock. She was sure it would work. She was sure this was her chance to break free. The day of the supposed announcement arrived. left. Rachel sat in front of her laptop, her heart racing, waiting for the news that would make her rich. Liam sat beside her, his arms crossed, his expression grim. He'd tried to stop her but he couldn't. Now all they could do was wait. But the announcement never came. Instead, the company released a statement the project they'd been working on had failed. The stock plummeted fast. Rachel watched in horror as the numbers on her screen turned red, as their savings evaporated, as the loan she'd taken out became a mountain of debt. It wasn't just a dip, it was a disaster. She didn't understand why hadn't the announcement happened. Why had the market reversed? Then it hit her: information bias, time misalignment. Her memories were from a different life, a different timeline. Her decision to invest early had altered the market, had changed the company's trajectory. The future she'd relied on was gone, replaced by a new reality, one where she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Panic set and she started clicking frantically, trying to sell the stock to cut her losses. But it was too late. The market was crashing and she was caught in the middle. For the first time since her rebirth, she felt truly powerless, just like she had when Ethan pushed her off the terrace. By the end of the day, it was over. They'd lost everything, their savings were gone. The loan was due and they had no way to pay it back. They were completely wiped out. Rachel sat in silence, staring at her laptop, her mind blank. She'd destroyed everything they'd built. She'd ignored Liam's warnings, gambled with their future and lost. Liam stood up, his face cold, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He just looked at her and said, "I'm out." "What?" Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "Liam, wait, we can fix this, we can start over. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No," he cut her off, his tone final. "I told you not to do this. I told you leverage was a trap. I told you not to gamble. But you didn't listen. You're still the same person, chasing shortcuts, relying on lies, running from reality. I'm not going down with you. The deal is off." He grabbed his things and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Rachel was left alone in an empty apartment, surrounded by debt and failure. This was the most important node of the entire story. Her world had crashed again, but this time it was her own fault. Not Ethan's, not fate's, hers. Rachel tried to reach out to Liam, to apologize, to beg him to come back. But he ignored her calls, blocked her texts, avoided the corner where they'd first met. He wanted nothing to do with her, and she couldn't blame him. She'd betrayed his trust, even if their partnership was just a transaction. She'd ignored his expertise, she'd destroyed everything they'd built. A week later, she finally tracked him down. He was sitting on a different corner, reading a newspaper, his expression closed off. She approached him, her voice broken, her pride gone. "Liam, please, I'm sorry, I was wrong, can we just..." He looked up at her, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "You're not sorry," he said, cutting her off. "You're sorry you lost, you're sorry you messed up, but you're not sorry for what you did. You're still running, Rachel, running from your past, running from your mistakes, running from the fact that you don't know how to do this the right way. You're not creating the future, you're escaping reality." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. He was right. She'd been running from the moment she'd been reborn. Running from Ethan, running from her past mistakes, running from the fact that she wasn't as strong, as smart, as capable as she'd thought. She'd used her memories as a crutch, used Liam as a way to avoid facing her own flaws. And now she'd lost everything. Liam stood up and walked away, leaving her standing alone. Their relationship was broken irreparably, it seemed, and there was no one to blame but herself. Rachel didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't wallow in self-pity. She just sat on the sidewalk, staring at the ground for hours. This was her first real collapse, not the dramatic emotional breakdown of her past life, but a quiet, crushing realization she wasn't better than her past self. She was the same naive, impulsive, greedy. She'd thought rebirth would make her stronger, would give her a chance to fix her mistakes. But she'd just repeated them. She thought about Ethan, about the way he'd used her, about the way she'd let him. She thought about Liam, about the trust she'd broken, about the opportunity she'd wasted. She thought about her unborn child, about the life they'd never had. And she realized she hadn't grown, she hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who'd let herself be used, the same woman who'd made terrible decisions, the same woman who'd fallen from grace. It was a quiet, devastating truth, and it hurt more than any fall, any betrayal, any failure. For the first time, she had to face herself, all her flaws, all her mistakes, all her weaknesses. And she didn't like what she saw. The collapse lasted for 3 days. Rachel didn't leave her apartment, she didn't eat, she didn't sleep. She just sat staring at the walls, replaying every mistake she'd made, from trusting Ethan to relying on her memories to betraying Liam. But on the 4th day, she woke up and something shifted. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being the same person. She got up, showered, and sat down at her laptop. She deleted all her notes about future stocks, all her plans based on memories. She started fresh. She pulled up market reports, analyzed trends, studied financial statements, really studied them, not just glancing at them through the lens of her past. She read books on investing, on risk management, on the psychology of the market. She focused on the present, on the numbers, on the things she could control. She gave up her future dependence. She stopped trying to predict what what would happen. Instead, she started to analyze what was happening right now. She learned to spot patterns, to calculate risks, to make decisions based on data, not memories. It was hard, it was slow, it was frustrating, but it was real. This was her growth beginning. No shortcuts, no lies, no crutches. Just hard work and a commitment to doing better. Weeks passed. Rachel worked tirelessly, honing her skills, analyzing the market, making small, careful investments with the little money she had left. Money she'd borrowed from her parents, who'd noticed her change and offered their support. She didn't rely on her memories, she didn't look for shortcuts. She just trusted her analysis, trusted her instincts, her real instincts, not the ones shaped by the future. Then she spotted it, a small biotech company with a promising new drug undervalued by the market because of a recent scandal that had been blown out of proportion. Rachel analyzed the data, read the research, calculated the risks. She was sure it was a good bet, one based on facts, not memories. She invested her last $5,000. A week later, the company released new data proving the drug's effectiveness, and the stock soared. She doubled her money. It wasn't a big win, but it was hers, earned through her own skill, her own analysis, her own hard work. For the first time, she felt truly proud of herself. She hadn't cheated, she hadn't relied on the future. She'd done it on her own. Rachel's small win didn't go unnoticed. Liam, who'd been keeping an eye on the market and secretly on her, saw the investment. He recognized the strategy, the careful analysis, the focus on undervalued assets, the low-risk approach. It was the strategy he'd tried to teach her, the strategy she'd ignored. But now she was using it, and she was succeeding. He didn't reach out to her, not yet. But he started paying attention. He watched her make other small, smart investments. He saw her grow more confident, more disciplined, more focused. He saw that she'd changed, not because of a shortcut, not because of a memory, but because she'd faced her mistakes and learned from them. Liam's interest wasn't emotional, it wasn't about friendship or forgiveness. It was about ability. He'd always known she was smart, too smart to waste her talent on shortcuts. Now she was finally living up to that potential. And in the cutthroat world of finance, ability was the only currency that mattered. He started to wonder if she was worth another chance, not as a partner in a transaction, but as an equal. A month later, Liam approached Rachel. He found her sitting in a coffee shop, poring over market reports, her laptop open, a focused look on her face. He sat down across from her, no fanfare, no apologies. "You've gotten better," he said, his tone neutral. Rachel looked up surprised but didn't let her guard down. "Thanks. I have a proposition," Liam said, leaning forward. "A new deal, but this time it's on my terms." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Your terms? No more gambling, no more leverage, no more relying on anything but your own analysis. We split the work evenly, you handle the connections and the financials. I handle the strategy and the market trends. We make decisions together and we both have veto power. Profits split 50-50. And if you ever revert to your old ways, if you ever start cheating, ever start gambling, this deal is off permanently." It was a reverse of their first deal. This time Liam was in control, setting the rules. Rachel thought about it for a moment. She knew he was right. She knew she deserved the terms. She nodded. Deal. It wasn't a reconciliation, it wasn't a friendship. It was a new transaction, one based on mutual respect, on ability, on the understanding that both of them had something to prove. And this time Rachel was ready. The new partnership was different. There was no tension, no frustration, no power struggles. For the first time they worked as a team, truly side by side. Rachel brought her sharp financial mind, her ability to navigate the world of high finance, her connections, which she was now using wisely, not recklessly. Liam brought his analytical genius, his ability to spot trends, his skepticism of the market's lies. They spent hours together, poring over reports, debating strategies, challenging each other's ideas. It was a constant clash of minds, Rachel pushing for slightly more aggressive moves, Liam urging caution. Rachel focusing on the big picture, Liam zeroing in on the details. But they listened to each other, they respected each other's expertise, they compromised. One afternoon they spent 3 hours arguing over a potential investment in a renewable energy company. Rachel saw the long-term potential, the chance to make a difference while making money. Liam saw the short-term risks, the volatility of the industry. They went back and forth, citing data, challenging each other's assumptions, refusing to back down. In the end they found a middle ground, investing a small amount with strict parameters for pulling out if the market shifted. As they shook hands on the decision, Rachel smiled. This was what partnership was supposed to be, two people with different strengths working together to make the best decision. Not one person dictating, not one person following, equal. It was a feeling she'd never had with Ethan, a feeling she'd never thought she'd have with anyone. And it felt good. Rachel and Liam's partnership was thriving. They'd built their capital back up, made a series of smart investments, and were starting to make a name for themselves in small circles. They were still under the radar, exactly how they wanted it. But that didn't last long. They were at a small industry conference networking with other investors when Ethan Blackwell walked in. He was older, more polished, more confident confident than Rachel remembered him being at this age. He was already building his reputation as a rising star in finance, his manipulation skills already starting to pay off. He was surrounded by a group of investors laughing, charming, playing the part of the successful entrepreneur. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She froze, her hands clenched, her mind racing. This was the first time she'd seen him since her rebirth, since he'd pushed her off the terrace. Liam noticed her reaction, placed a hand on her arm and whispered, "Breathe. He doesn't recognize you." Liam was right. Ethan didn't recognize her, not yet. She was younger, more confident, more poised than the naive 22-year-old he'd manipulated in her past life. But then his eyes scanned the room and they landed on her. He paused, his smile fading slightly as if he was trying to place her. He didn't know who she was, but he felt something, curiosity, maybe interest. He'd noticed her, and that was dangerous. Ethan excused himself from his group and started walking toward her. Rachel's heart raced, but she stood her ground. She wouldn't run, not this time. She'd faced her mistakes, she'd grown, she was ready to face him. "I don't think we've met," Ethan said, extending his hand to Rachel, his smile charming, his eyes calculating. "Ethan Blackwell, I've seen you around, you're making some smart moves in the market, impressive." Rachel shook his hand, her grip firm, her expression neutral. "Rachel Vanderbilt." Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He knew the Vanderbilt name, one of the most powerful families in finance. "Vanderbilt? Really? I'm surprised I haven't met you before. Your family's firm is doing some great work." He glanced at Liam, his expression dismissive, as if he didn't even belong in the same room. "And who's your friend?" Liam said, stepping forward, his hand outstretched. "I'm Rachel's partner." Ethan shook his hand, but his gaze lingered on Rachel, his interest growing. He could see her potential, her sharp mind, her family connections, her poise. She was a valuable asset, one he wanted to add to his manipulation team. "It's a pleasure," he said, his smile returning. "I'd love to talk more, maybe discuss a potential partnership. I think we could do great things together, Rachel." Rachel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A week after the conference, Ethan acted faster than Rachel had anticipated. He didn't directly propose cooperation, but rather through a more covert and enticing method, resource allocation. Rachel received an invitation from Ethan's newly established fund, Blackwell Capital, ostensibly for industry exchange, but in reality a private dinner. The venue was a private club on a Manhattan penthouse, the core circle where old money and new elites mingled. At the dinner, Ethan didn't discuss specific deals, but instead showed Rachel a world. Unlimited financial control, insider information channels accessible only to core members, and a social network capable of directly influencing policy-making. "The Vanderbilt family's resources are indeed impressive," Ethan said, swirling his whiskey, his eyes deep. "But you're bound by the family's conservative strategies. Your talent is being wasted. With me you can make any deal you want, no approval processes, no elders interfering. As long as you bring returns, the resources are at your disposal." He pushed a document towards her, a letter of intent. It stated that Rachel could independently manage a subfund of up to $50 million, with complete investment decision-making authority. The only condition was that she would report to Ethan and cooperate with his strategy on certain specific projects. "This isn't employment, this is partnership." Ethan smiled, as if he had returned to his former gentle self. "I want you to be my right-hand woman, even more so in the future." This was a huge lure for Rachel, who desperately needed to expand her capital and take revenge on Ethan. This was a godsend. With this funding and authority, she could quickly build a force powerful enough to shake Ethan's foundation. Back in her apartment, Rachel stared at the letter of intent, unable to sleep all night. Reason told her it was a trap. Ethan never gave anyone a free lunch. This freedom must hide a greater manipulation. But desire grew wildly within her. She remembered the despair of her bankruptcy, Liam's homelessness, and the helplessness she felt in her past life when she was gradually sidelined. "If I accept, I can skip 10 years of accumulation," she whispered to herself in the mirror. "As long as I'm careful, as long as I build my own defenses before he finds out, I can use his money to defeat him." The next morning, she even picked up a pen ready to sign the letter of intent. Her hand trembled, her breath quickened. At that moment, she was no longer the calm avenger, but a gambler consumed by the lust for power. She told herself this was just a temporary measure, merely for revenge. Just as the pen was about to touch the paper, the doorbell rang. It was Liam. He rarely came to her apartment unless there was an urgent market change. Liam walked into the room and immediately noticed the letter of intent on the table and the pen in Rachel's hand. He didn't ask, "What's this?" His gaze instantly turned cold, as if he were looking at a stranger. "You're planning to sign?" Liam's voice was terrifyingly calm. "This will speed things up," Rachel argued, her voice trembling. "We need capital, Liam. At our current pace, by the time I'm capable of competing with Ethan, it'll be too late. This is an opportunity." "An opportunity?" Liam scoffed, picking up the letter of intent, glancing at the terms, then slamming it on the table. "Can't you see the control clauses? Clause 12, he has the right to audit your accounts at any time. Clause 15, he has a veto. Once you you sign you're not a partner anymore, you're his puppet, just like in my past life. This time is different, I'll be careful. Rachel raised her voice, becoming hysterical when her sore spot was hit. You don't understand, you just want to make a comfortable little money, but I want to win. I want him to pay the price, it's worth the risk for that goal. Liam took a step closer, his gaze sharp as a knife fixed intently on her eyes. He uttered the central line that runs through the entire volume. Rachel, look at yourself. To win, you're prepared to sell your independence. Prepared to walk back into his cage. You think you're using him, but in his eyes you're just a better tool. You are just becoming him in a different way. These words struck Rachel like a hammer blow. Becoming him? Rachel was stunned. Greed, ruthless, sacrificing principles for ends. Liam pointed at her. What's the difference between that and Ethan? If you sign this document, you've already lost because you've become the person you hate the most. What's the point of that kind of victory? A deathly silence fell over the room. Rachel looked at herself in the mirror, pale faced, her eyes feverish and twisted. She suddenly realized that Liam was right. If she accepted Ethan's rules, even if she won in the end, she would just be another Ethan. What would be the point of her rebirth then? After a long silence, Rachel put down her pen. The feverishness in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by a cold clarity. You're right, she said softly, I can't be him. But she didn't choose to directly reject Ethan either. A direct confrontation would only alert him and make Ethan wary. She needed a smarter, more subtle approach. I won't sign. Rachel picked up the phone, dialed Ethan's assistant's number, and her tone regained its usual elegance and composure. Tell Ethan that I'm honored to receive the invitation. However, I'm currently focused on some internal adjustments to the family foundation and cannot accept a new position at the moment. However, I'm very interested in several projects he mentioned, and perhaps we can collaborate on some non-exclusive projects as external consultants. This was an ambiguous answer. It didn't completely break off relations, leaving Ethan with the impression that she was still hesitant and there was still room for negotiation, while simultaneously preserving her complete independence. After hanging up, Rachel turned to Liam. He doesn't believe I'll refuse. He'll continue to probe, continue to throw out bait. And that's our opportunity. What are you going to do? Liam asked. Set things up. A cold glint flashed in Rachel's eyes. Since he wants to play the game, I'll play along. But what he doesn't know is that from this moment on, the roles of hunter and prey have begun to reverse. Rachel didn't waste the information Ethan provided. During the previous dinner and discussions, Ethan, to demonstrate his capabilities, intentionally or unintentionally revealed several key projects he was about to undertake, one of which was the acquisition of a startup called Apex Tech. In her previous life, this acquisition was very successful, making Ethan a fortune. But Rachel knew that this time the timeline had changed. After rebuilding the logic in Chapter 18, she spent several weeks conducting in-depth research into Apex Tech's underlying technology, discovering a serious legal loophole in their core patents, a loophole that would surface in 3 months. Ethan was unaware of this loophole because he relied on superficial financial data and false growth expectations, precisely the methods he had used in his previous life. Rachel decided to exploit this instead of directly shorting. That would be too obvious. She began quietly accumulating Apex Tech put options on the secondary market through several hidden offshore accounts. Simultaneously, she deliberately projected an image of confidence in Apex Tech during her advisory communications with Ethan. She showed great interest, even feigning a willingness to co-invest. Let her co-invest, Ethan told his confidant in his office. Rachel Vanderbilt's name will make the market more optimistic about this deal. Once she invests, will drive up the stock price, and then she won't be able to get out. Ethan thought he was using Rachel's reputation for endorsement, but little did he know Rachel was digging his own grave. Not only did she not invest any real money, but she also exploited his misjudgment of the market, setting a precise trap. It was a small-scale game. Rachel didn't need to use her full strength, just a gentle push at a crucial moment. A week later, Apex Tech's patent lawsuit was leaked prematurely. Rachel anonymously provided clues to the media, and the stock price plummeted. Ethan's acquisition plan was forced to halt. His initial investment went down the drain, and his allies who followed him suffered heavy losses. Rachel sat in front of the screen watching the sharp decline in Ethan's fund's net asset value, a faint cold smile playing on her lips. She had won a round, not much but painful enough. The atmosphere in Ethan's office was heavy. He stared at the loss report, his brow furrowed. This wasn't market volatility, this was a targeted attack. Someone had anticipated his prediction, someone had planted a time bomb within his scheme. Have you figured out who it is? Ethan asked coldly. There's no concrete evidence yet, his assistant said cautiously, but several transaction paths seem to point to some accounts associated with the Vanderbilt family. However, Rachel clearly expressed interest in the project that day. It doesn't seem like she was behind it. Ethan stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the New York nightscape. He recalled Rachel's calm yet aloof gaze that day. way. Whether it's her or not, Ethan said softly, she's already caught my attention. I initially thought she was just a lost lamb, but it turns out she's hiding claws. He turned around, his eyes flashing with murderous intent. Confirm she's a threat. Activate plan B of the cleanup operation. Since she doesn't want to join in willingly, let's make sure she can't establish herself in this market. Meanwhile, in Rachel's apartment, Liam, looking at the increasing profits in her account, poured Rachel a glass of water for the first time. Well done, we won beautifully this time. Rachel took the glass and they smiled at each other. There was no ambiguity, no passion in that smile, only a tacit understanding and acceptance born from a life or death experience. They were no longer transactional partners wary of each other, nor master and servant in a dependent relationship. They were comrades in arms, people on the same side. This is just a small victory, Rachel said, looking out the window, her expression grave. Ethan won't let this go, he's already starting to suspect. I know. Liam walked to her side, standing beside her. So we're prepared too. Rachel nodded. She recalled the despair she felt before her death in her past life, and looked at the man beside her, once considered her destined one, now her most dangerous ally. This volume ended. They didn't become lovers, not even friends, but they became each other's strongest support. Rachel spoke softly, as if declaring war on herself and on the darkness behind her. This time there's more than one hunter.